Hey everyone, welcome to your local haunt, and welcome to 2026, we made it. So, tonight, we open the door to a haunting that lasted longer than most modern marriages. 12 years of knocks, voices, fires, messages, and fear in a modest London home that never asked for anything but quiet. Tonight we're looking at the Battersea Poltergeist. In January 1956, a teenage girl named Shirley Hitchings woke to a tapping sound that seemed to crawl out the very bones of her room. A rhythm that built itself carefully, deliberately. It was a knock that wanted to be heard. What followed became one of the longest running and best documented poltergeist cases in British history. Witnesses included neighbours, journalists, researchers, and even police. Entire rooms shook. Objects vanished and reappeared. Notes were written by unseen hands. Fires flickered to life in empty rooms. And behind everything lurked a name. Donald. Some called him a spirit. Some called him a delusion. Others believed he was something far older and far darker than either. Tonight we sift through the archives, the statements, the testimonies, the exhaustion in the Hitchings family voices, and the icy logic of investigators who stared into the strange and found themselves blinking back fear. Draw the curtains, ignore the shadows shifting behind you, because the Battersea Poltergeist is not a story that wants to be forgotten. Wycliffe Road in Battersea was nothing special in 1956. Rows of terraced houses, laundry hung out to dry, workers trudging home through the fog. Nothing sinister, just London being London. Inside number 63 lived a close family. Wally Hitchings, a printer, steady and pragmatic. Kitty, his wife, fiercely protective of their daughter. Shirley, 15, curious, bright, yet private. Ethel, Wally's mother, quietly perceptive in ways that unsettled people who underestimated her. Nothing about this household hinted to a future of terror. Until Shirley woke one night to the sound of something gnawing at her room. At first she thought it was the wind, then a mouse, then the plumbing. But the rhythm told a different story. Not random, not mechanical. It was intentional. Scratching under her bed, tapping behind her headboard, the strange sensation that the very air was tightening around her lungs. When she sat up and shouted for her parents, the noise stopped instantly, and that silence felt intelligent, attentive, and listening. Shirley wasn't the only one who had heard it. Her parents lay awake too, staring at the ceiling, following the faint taps like Morse code. They checked every pipe, every board, and every crawl space. And there was nothing. The next night it returned, louder, closer, and even bolder. It travelled through the house as if choosing where to speak from. Footsteps without weight, scrapes without a source. And then came the first moment that shifted the Hitchings from uneasy to terrified. When Wally knocked on the wall knocked back. 1 for yes, 2 for no. A code the entity seemed eager to use. The house had woken up. As days bled into weeks, the strange sounds multiplied. Objects shifted. Clothing spilled from drawers that no one had touched. Shirley's bed shook with enough force to rattle the frame. Friends visiting the house reported a coldness in Shirley's room that seemed to cling to their skin like a warning. One described it as walking into a church crypt that didn't want you inside. And always, the phenomena chose Shirley. Her shoes walked across the room on their own. Her blankets slid from her body with slow, deliberate precision. Her bedroom door opened in the middle of the night, inch by inch, as though someone was watching her sleep. What made everything worse was this. The entity wasn't chaotic. It was patterned, responsive, and it knew when it had their attention. That's when Wally began keeping notes, unintentionally becoming the family's first investigator. He recorded times, temperatures, incidents, and the pattern was clear. Everything intensified when Shirley entered a room, and everything escalated when she was frightened. One morning, Kitty walked into the kitchen and froze. A knife stood upright on the table, balanced impossibly on the blade, pointing directly at where Shirley would sit for breakfast. No one in the family ever forgot that moment. Now every haunting reaches a turning point when the unknown stops lurking in the shadows and steps into the light. And for the Hitchings, that moment became when the entity began answering questions. Through various knocks and scrapes, through a system of taps that the family refined across long, sleepless nights. When asked for a name, the entity chose Donald. The name wasn't whispered, wasn't heard in a dream. It was spelled out through knocks by referencing letters. The entity announced itself. Donald's presence sharpened quickly. Items vanished. Keys, money, small objects belonging to Shirley. Days later, they reappeared in bizarre places, inside pillowcases, tucked into a coat pocket, or hidden in shoes. Shirley once found a silver spoon on her pillow that didn't belong to the family at all. And then came the messages. Words scrawled in charcoal, in pencil, on envelopes, scraps of paper, and then even walls. The handwriting varied. Childlike one day, angular the next. Sometimes educated, or sometimes it was barely legible. But the content carried a personality. It was sarcastic, petulant, curious, and very possessive. The press caught wind of the haunting, and soon reporters swarmed Wycliffe Road. Donald responded by escalating further. One evening, as a reporter asked if Donald was present, the reply thundered through the house. Witnesses wrote that their skin prickled as if the air had snapped. Donald seemed to like an audience. Into this storm stepped a man who would become crucial to this case. Harold Chibbett, an amateur paranormal researcher who was employed by British Rail. A man with a quiet demeanour, a meticulous mind, and a relentless dedication to both the Hitchings family and the truth. He spent years documenting every detail of the haunting. What Chibbett found terrified him. He witnessed knocks that came from inside the walls no human could reach. He watched objects glide across tables. He saw messages appear moments after turning his back. His notes paint a portrait of a haunting far more complex than the usual poltergeist pattern. Donald wasn't just reactive. He was conversational. He showed bursts of emotion. He taunted, he lied, and he flattered. At times he seemed childlike, desperate for attention, and at others, his tone darkened, turning jealous, controlling, and territorial. Chibbett became convinced Donald was bound to Shirley, but whether spiritually or psychologically he couldn't say. But he wrote, "This is no simple haunting. This entity is intelligent and evolving." Newspapers sensationalized the situation. Police grew suspicious of Shirley. The pressure on the family, and especially Shirley, intensified. And Donald, feeding on tension, he grew a lot stronger. 1958 marked a new phase, a much darker phase. The year the fires began. Small blazes erupted in empty rooms. Curtains smouldered. Paper piles ignited without a match in sight. One night, Shirley woke coughing from a room thick with smoke. On her pillow was a scorch mark. Her hair was warm at the tips. The fabric beneath her blackened in a perfect oval. Police arrived and they accused her of arson. But officers who searched the house later admitted privately that the fires seemed impossible to explain. The Hitchings were trapped between fear of the supernatural and fear of public judgment. Newspapers called Shirley the Battersea fire starter. She withdrew from friends, from school, and from life outside the house. And Donald, he tapped gleeful messages that suggested he was proud of the chaos. One reading, "I told you I could do more." And another, "Why'd you ignore me?" The house grew darker. Ethel, the grandmother, refused to leave Shirley alone at night. Wally barely slept. And Kitty cried quietly in the kitchen so her daughter wouldn't hear. And still, the knocks came. Persistent, rhythmic, claiming space in the walls. By 1960, the haunting had become a relentless war of attrition. Visitors were unwitting witnesses. Friends felt invisible hands brush their hair. Journalists heard thuds so violent they thought furniture had collapsed. Neighbours reported shaking walls in the middle of the night. And one friend of the family fled the house after hearing a voice whisper, clear as breath, directly beside her, "Get out." Shirley's room was ground zero. A cold so dense it pinned itself to her skin. A humming pressure in the air like static waiting to strike. Many refused to step over the threshold. Chibbett's notes described nights where the knocks were so constant that conversations became impossible. A soundtrack of unseen fists hammering from the inside of the walls. Hours at a time. No pauses. No mercy. Donald wasn't fading. He was growing. And then after more than a decade, he went quiet. No, it wasn't suddenly. It was gradually. Like a storm was bleeding its rage into the horizon. As Shirley reached adulthood, found work, began building a life beyond the house, Donald's presence waned. No more taps. No more messages. No more fires. No more footsteps in the dark. Just silence, where chaos used to live. Then when Shirley married and moved out, the haunting ended entirely. She still carried the scars. Public, private, and emotional. But the entity that had shaped 12 years of her life dissolved without explanation. Donald's goodbye never came. He simply sank beneath the floorboards of history. Now researchers still debate the Battersea case. Skeptics argue psychological stress or unconscious trickery. Believers point to the multiple witnesses, the consistency of events, and the longevity no known hoax could sustain. But everyone agrees one thing. Nothing about the Battersea Poltergeist fits the usual patterns. Poltergeist cases typically burn hot and fast, weeks, maybe months. But this one lasted over 12 years. It involved dozens of witnesses, none of whom reported catching Shirley faking even the smallest incident. And the written messages, hundreds of them, remain one of the strangest archives in paranormal history. Shirley herself, even decades later, insisted, "I didn't create Donald. He was real." Whether Donald was a spirit, a fragment of consciousness, a psychic manifestation, or something else entirely, his presence left a long shadow across Battersea. And even today, paranormal investigators tread carefully when they approach the case. Some say the entity still lingers. Not in the house, not in the family, but in the documentation itself. A story too potent to fully die. The Battersea Poltergeist is an anomaly. A haunting that grew a personality. It was a voice. It was a name. And it was a history, whether true or invented. that clung to a teenage girl for more than a decade. It sits in that uneasy space between belief and skepticism, where the human mind meets the shadows of the unknown. Some stories refuse to settle. Some knock, quietly and persistently, just waiting for someone to listen again. And if you ever walk the streets of Battersea at night, if you pass the rebuilt site where number 63 once stood, listen closely. Sometimes hauntings end. Sometimes they move on. And sometimes they just wait. This has been your local haunt. Until next time, keep the lights close and the shadows closer.